Hello, welcome back to another Truth Outreach program. A program that is grounded in truth, that brings you a comparison between the teachings of the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Christianity. And of course, the baseline that we use for that comparison is the good old BIBLE, basic instruction before leaving earth, God's inerrant word. So welcome back to another program. Glad to have you here. I'm Rocky Hulson. This lovely lady on my right is my beautiful wife, Helen.
Welcome.
And we're happy to be here again in your living room today, or visiting with you today. Right. We always like to start out our this program with a couple of quotes from Mormon leaders, one from Brigham Young and the other from his first counselor, George A. Smith. So these are the absolute top two leaders of the Mormon Church in their day. But we believe that these quotes justify what we do. The first one is from Brigham Young. And Brigham Young says, "I say to the whole world, receive the truth, no matter who presents it to you. Take up the Bible, compare the religion of the Latter-day Saints with it, and see if it will stand the test." And that's exactly what we do here. We compare against the Bible. Now, his first counselor, George A. Smith, said this: "If a faith will not bear to be investigated, if its preachers and professors are afraid to have it examined, their foundation must be very weak." So we believe that those two quotes really legitimize what we do on this program. Now, the title of today's program is Mormonism's Influence on Elizabeth Smart, on the Elizabeth Smart Kidnapping, a preliminary look. Now, we're going to do this in two parts. Today's part one, and next week we'll do part two, because there's a lot of information here.
And we should notate that the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping happened in Salt Lake City.
Right. It was Elizabeth Smart kidnapping, which we've seen on the news, which was the kidnapping of that young girl out in Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. Now, we're filming this just 3 weeks after she was returned. So that's why we're saying this is a preliminary look, because more information obviously is going to come out with the investigation and as this thing progresses and goes into trial. Right. Now, you know, when we notice there are really some profound parallels to Mormonism that are just readily apparent as we're heading through this. And so there's lots of little pieces here, and it's really kind of a part of a big puzzle. And as this terrible deed comes to trial and more information comes out, we will do some updated programs to keep you posted on other things that we see, which really show the parallels between Brian Mitchell and his actions and Mormonism. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, we as a nation witnessed this atrocity, you know, the kidnapping of this girl, you know, and she was horrible. Yeah, it was horrible. She was totally innocent, you know, it was a terrible thing. Something you know, just wouldn't want to happen to anyone. Right. A terrible, terrible thing. And Helen and I are as happy as you are that this girl has been returned home. Absolutely. And we also want to see this guy get prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Full extent of the law.
You know, obviously.
Yep.
So what's this program about? Well, as Helen and I watched the events unfold on TV, and you know, now that it's just been kind of pushed off to the side because of the war programming, but before the war started, I mean, every night was, you know, Elizabeth Smart on the news, mm-hmm. And this terrible thing, and it is a terrible thing. But as this all started to unfold, and Brian Mitchell and Elizabeth was returned, and Brian Mitchell and his wife Wanda Barzee, that's her name, mm-hmm. As they were arrested, we were kind of speculating. We were sitting there watching the news on TV, and we're saying between ourselves there in the living room, you know, hey, I wonder, you know, if this guy is a Mormon. You know, mm-hmm. high probability since Utah is 3/4, you know, 75% Mormon, but. Right. But the initial reports that came out from the news called him a street preacher and part of the homeless crowd. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, right from the start, the Mormon protection system went into effect. Why? Because in Mormonism, you must protect the church at all costs. I call it protecting the myth. And it's not just in this case, it happens a lot. Anytime that there's bad light shed on a Mormon church, boy, they go into full protection mode.
Circle the wagons.
Yeah, certainly that's a good way of putting it. The initial reports, said that he was a street preacher, and he led and led people to believe, anyone out there watching, that he was kind of like a Christian fanatic.
Well, that's exactly what they called him, the fanatical street preacher.
Yeah. And and there's a real and immediately we knew that there was Mormons don't use the term.
To me, that the red flags went up.
Yeah, well, because the Mormon Church does not use the word preacher.
Never.
They don't call their pastors preachers. They don't
have
preach
pastors.
sermons. Exactly. Okay, so it's a word. The word preacher is a foreign word to Mormonism.
To any Mormon.
They, by using that term, the people who knew when they were reporting it that he was a fundamentalist Mormon
We're lying.
They were being a little disingenuous. Let's put it that way.
Okay, well, they're lying.
And you see, they knew he was an ex-Mormon. They knew he was a fundamentalist Mormon, but they chose to characterize him as a preacher, trying to take the spotlight off of Mormonism. The news reports out now say that Brian Mitchell was a Mormon. Everyone has now heard that. And that the news report said he was a temple Mormon, and he was excommunicated from the church. Now, Mitchell identifies himself as a fundamentalist Mormon, and he took Elizabeth to be his polygamous wife. What does fundamentalist, what does Mormon fundamentalism and polygamy have to do with each other? Well, a lot.
Everything.
A whole lot. So let's just take it right from the top. So what is a fundamentalist Mormon? The fundamentalists are a splinter group of Latter-day Saints which sprung up in the last few years in opposition to the manifesto issued by President Wilford Woodruff, and that was the fourth prophet of the Mormon Church, Wilford Woodruff. They hold to the teachings of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young without deviation, and still believe in the teaching and literal practice of polygamy. Some of them have been tried in the civil courts for violating the law against polygamous marriage, which law was enacted by Congress and accepted by the authorities of all other branches of the Latter-day Saints. Now, the manifesto that ended, and that's what it's called the manifesto, that ended polygamy was issued by this same guy that we just had up there, we quoted about, the fourth prophet of the Mormon Church. His name was Wilford Woodruff, and this manifesto was issued in the year 1890. Now, fundamentalist Mormons believe that they are living true Mormonism. The official revelation on polygamy is contained in the Doctrine and Covenants, as section 132. It is there today. Now, the Doctrine and Covenants is one of the 4 books of Mormon scripture. It's part of their canon. Now, it's there today, section 132 about polygamy. It's there right now, today. It's never been removed, and this is what it states in verse 1, section 132. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Joseph, that inasmuch as you have inquired of my hand to know and understand wherein I, the Lord, justified my servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as also Moses, David, and Solomon, my servants, as touching the principle and doctrine of their having many wives and concubines. This revelation starts out as, thus saith the Lord.
Yeah, and you've got to remember that this is talking about the Mormon God.
Sure.
This is Mormon scripture. This is not the God of the Bible. This is the Mormon scripture. The Bible, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Mormon, and the Pearl of Great Price that they carry to their meetings every Sunday. It's
right.
Mormonism.
So this revelation by Joseph Smith that is contained in their Doctrine and Covenants is section 132. We just had it up there, verse 1, and it starts out with, thus saith the Lord. According to Joseph Smith and the Mormon Church, as this is published in their scripture, their canonized books, this revelation is a direct commandment from the Lord himself. This revelation is 66 verses long and clearly lays out the Mormon doctrine on polygamy. Now, verse 4, we just saw verse 1. Now we're going to put verse 4 up. It says, verse 4 of this Mormon revelation tells us what happens if a Mormon does not obey this commandment, thus saith the Lord. Verse 4 says, for behold, I reveal unto you a new and an everlasting covenant, And if ye abide not that covenant, then are ye damned. For no one can reject this covenant and be permitted to enter into my glory. This verse calls this doctrine a new and everlasting covenant that must be followed, or the Mormon will be damned. Now, did you get the wording there in this verse 4? Everlasting covenant. Everlasting means forever, never ending. Right. So when did the Mormon Church stop practicing polygamy? That was a thus saith the Lord and an everlasting, and if a Mormon didn't practice it, they would be damned. When did they stop this? Well, Utah was trying to become a state. And because they were practicing polygamy, the United States turned their petition down for statehood because of that. So on September the 24th, 1890, the then prophet of the Mormon Church, whose name was Wilford Woodruff, issued what was called the Manifesto. That's what it's called in Mormonism. And it was in advising Mormons not to practice polygamy. Now remember, the revelation to Joseph Smith from the Lord instituting polygamy began with, "Thus saith the Lord." Well, this is how the Manifesto, which ends polygamy, begins. I'm going to put it up on the screen. This is how this one begins. Okay? To whom it may concern. You know, I don't know.
Big difference between thus saith the Lord
is it just
and
me?
To whom may concern.
You know, is it just me, or does the revelation from Joseph Smith, what begins with a "Thus saith the Lord," you know, does it hold a little more weight than a "To whom it may concern"?
Yeah.
You know, the Manifesto really isn't that long. It's only five paragraphs. And the first 3 paragraphs of the Manifesto are simply a denial.
Right. That they were practicing it.
Yeah, that they were practicing, or you know, they were
going to practice it.
Well, it was a denial that they were performing any more polygamous marriages, and it was a denial and saying that they weren't going to conduct it anymore. Now, the next 2 statements that the Mormons, the next 2 paragraphs, were the statements that the Mormons won't practice polygamy anymore. And I'm going to put up for you, this is paragraph 4 of this official declaration, or as it's called, the Manifesto. Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriages, which laws have been pronounced constitutional by the court of last resort, I hereby declare my intention to submit to those laws and to use my influence with the members of the church over which I provide to have them do likewise. Now, do you see the wording here? I hereby declare my intention. He says to, quote, use my influence, unquote. This manifesto starts out with, to whom it may concern. The Mormon prophet Wilford Woodruff says that it's his intention and he will use his influence. Joseph Smith said, thus saith the Lord. And if ye abide not that covenant, then are ye damned. So let's continue and let's look at the last paragraph of this manifesto. This is paragraph 5, the last one. Remember, this manifesto was what ended polygamy in the Mormon Church. There is nothing in my teachings to the church or in those of my associates during the time specified which can be reasonably construed to inculcate or encourage polygamy. And when any elder of the church has used language which appeared to convey any such teaching, he has been promptly reproved. And I now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the laws of the land. Now, notice the wording in this last paragraph. I now publicly declare my advice. And then to refrain. Now, which sounds stronger to you? Thus saith the Lord, or it's my advice to refrain. Do you see why the Mormon Church has so many spin-off groups and an underground that is practicing polygamy?
A big underground.
You know, those that are practicing at the underground are simply looking at the facts.
They're following the prophet of the church, the founding prophet.
That's right. They're looking at the facts, they're looking at what Joseph Smith said, and then they're looking at what the fourth Mormon prophet, Wilford Woodruff, and they're saying, hey, this guy had no authority, you know, to come, you know, they're reading it just like we put it up on the screen. My intention is not to practice. My advice to you is to refrain. When Joseph Smith...
Well, there were several leaders in that time frame that didn't refrain.
Oh, sure. I mean, the third prophet of the Mormon Church, John Taylor, went into underground
with all of his wives.
With all of his wives, because he refused to, you know, to abide by the laws of the land. Yet Mormonism, in their Articles of Faith, which is their statement of faith, says that they will abide by the laws of the land, that they will be subjects to kings and presidents and whatever, that they will abide by those things, but they weren't. They went into underground. And the only reason that this guy issued this manifesto was to appease the Congress so that they could become a state.
Well, and they were going to have all their property confiscated too.
Exactly, because the United States, because they were a territory, they were, you know, the Spanish-American War is what annexed Utah into the United States. You know, when the Mormons left Nauvoo and went out to Utah, Utah, when they arrived there, was part of Mexico. And then we had the Spanish-American War, the war with Mexico, and we won the war, and so all of that territory that was once Mexican territory then became territory of the U.S. And that's how Utah then became the Utah Territory. And so then they were under the laws of the United States again. And hey, the laws of the United States, just like they were here in Illinois, when they were practicing polygamy, you know, when they were here in Nauvoo, they were practicing polygamy. They were breaking the laws of the United States. And then once Utah became a territory, they were breaking the laws again. But hey, there was big time advantages to becoming a state because, you know, receiving the protection of the United States, you know, federal assistance and all, you know, and all that kind of stuff. That's right. You know, the United States said, hey, you will abide by our laws or we're going to take your property.
And they would have. They'd have taken everything.
And so they went in, you know, they went into underground. But you see what the problem is here. So, you know, this guy, this Brian Mitchell, he, you know, was practicing what he believed were the fundamental teachings of Joseph Smith. And there's a whole lot of people like him that are doing that. And so that's why the Mormon Church has such a problem with this.
That's why
because these people are just looking like we have. We went, you know, they're looking at the very same books, the current books of the Mormon Church, and they're looking at that declaration, which is to whom it may concern. And then section 132, which is a direct revelation from God.
Thus saith the Lord, if you don't practice polygamy, you will be damned.
You will be damned.
Well,
exactly. So it's no wonder that Utah has such a problem with this. Why is there such an underground movement of these people out in Utah that call themselves fundamentalist Mormons?
And they're in Arizona and Nevada.
That's right.
And California.
And in Mexico.
Mexico is huge. They have a huge...
Yeah, there's a big polygamous colony down there. But down against, you're right, down against the Utah, the southern Utah, northern Arizona, above the Grand Canyon, there's a whole strip in there that
there's town after town after town.
Yeah, and they have all these polygamous colonies there. But, you know, we're going to continue. We're going to give you another quote here because it wasn't just Joseph Smith. You know, Brigham Young, the second prophet of the Mormon Church, followed up what Joseph Smith said, and this is what he said about polygamy. So I'm going to put that up for you. It says, the only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy. Others attain unto a glory and may even be permitted to come into the presence of the Father and the Son, but they cannot reign as kings in glory, because they had blessings offered to them and they refused to accept them. So, you know, the fundamentalists are an embarrassment to the Mormon Church. But within the context of Mormon doctrine, they are right.
They're practicing what the religion is.
Right. Now listen closely to what Helen and I are saying right here, okay? When I just said the fundamentalist Mormons who are practicing polygamy are right, I don't mean that within relation to Christianity. Oh, no, no, no. And I do not mean that with respect to the laws of the United States, which say polygamy is against the law.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. Polygamy is wrong, okay? It's wrong in Christianity. The Bible clearly teaches against it. It's wrong within the laws of the United States. Okay, so I'm not agreeing with polygamy. Don't get me wrong here.
Get right down to it. That's what started the whole thing over there in Nauvoo, because there were people in the Mormon church when Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy, and he was practicing it and lying about it and saying he wasn't practicing it. And that was what caused part of the problem over
part of the big rift that went on, why they had all the contention there.
Because some of the leadership was leaving the church.
Yeah, because Joseph Smith was standing up at the pulpit saying, who can find more than one wife? I only have one wife.
Right.
When they were there at the ceremonies where he was married to other women. 49. That's right. When he died, he had 49 wives. So what we're saying here is not that polygamy is right, because it is not right.
It's an abomination to God.
But what we're saying is within the context of Mormonism, if you look at the Mormon teachings, the fundamentalists out there in Utah, the people that call themselves fundamentalist Mormons and are practicing polygamy within the context of Mormonism,
their own teaching,
they are correct, because there's this huge contradiction there. Joseph Smith says this is a new and everlasting covenant. Everlasting means forever. It never ends.
And you'll be damned if you don't.
And you'll be damned if you don't practice it. And Brigham Young comes along on his heels and says that only those who practice polygamy can become gods. Okay, and goddesses, because the woman's going to be the goddess and the man's going to be the god in Mormonism.
Right.
And so here you have Joseph Smith, the number one prophet, who says, hey, I received this prophecy from God, and he didn't say to whom it may concern. He said, thus saith the Lord.
Right.
Okay? And so here's this revelation from Joseph Smith. Brigham Young comes on the heels and says only those who practice polygamy are going to, in Mormonism, Mormon theology, Mormon doctrine says that a man is going to be elevated to the level of God and his wife is going to be a goddess with him. But it's not going to be a wife, it's going to be wives, plural. Every god is going to have many wives. Okay, so these people out there in Utah that call themselves fundamentalists are really practicing their true religion.
Well, they're following the
doctrines,
founders of the church.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing.
Exactly. And see, and they look at the Utah Mormon Church that are not practicing polygamy
as being apostates.
As being apostates. That's right. They're not following the religion. They are the ones that have departed.
Yeah, they're an apostate.
They are apostates. They have left the truth.
Right.
Exactly right. So the fundamentalists, just that, fundamentalists. They are the true Mormons. They have maintained and adhered to true Mormon doctrines. Okay, so the Mormon Church is really caught between a rock and a hard place, because
big time.
Because if they, and Utah doesn't really prosecute polygamy. There's only been one prosecution of polygamy in the last 50 years. And they did it just before the Olympics to make it look like
they made an example out of Green.
Yeah, Tom Green guy, just so they could, because they had all these news, everybody,
around the world,
converged on Salt Lake because it was where the Winter Olympics were, and so to make it look like, they were on top of this, this nasty, polygamy. We're handling it, baloney. One prosecution in 50 years. And the underground, the Chicago Tribune on March the 22nd, 2003 says that the government estimates that polygamy in Utah is between 30 and 50,000 people are practicing it. And the reason that those estimates, there's a 20,000 fluctuation there between 30 and 50,000 is because they're underground. These marriage ceremonies are done in secret, and a guy like Tom Green only officially has one wife that he went down and got a marriage license, at the courthouse for. All the other ones are spiritual wives. That's what they call them, spiritual wives. And so, they have several wives, 5, 6, 10, whatever wives, but they only officially married one. And then these women, in today's society, you have women out there that are single moms with kids, and so, no one really looks at that as being, out of the norm or whatever, and they keep it quiet, and they don't, they're an underground, so they keep it quiet that they're practicing polygamy.
They live right within in the confines of the neighborhoods there in Salt Lake City, where they'll have like 3 or 4 houses in a row, and this man has 3 or 4 families in a row in houses. So, like you said, no one really says anything.
And this is just kept quiet. This is what they call Utah's dirty little secret, polygamy. And in Utah, the church just has no heart to prosecute it, because if they did,
they'd have to take out Section 132.
Yeah, well, they'd have to. It would confront them.
They would have to remove from their canonized scripture Section 132, and they're not going to do that, because that's a "Thus saith the Lord" from the founder of the church.
And that would make Joseph Smith look like a false prophet. Okay, so they're just not. The easiest thing. Well, I agree with that. Okay, Joseph Smith is a false prophet.
Always will be.
But the reason that they don't pursue it is because if you just ignore it and you don't say anything, then no one pays any attention to it. And the only time that it rears its ugly head is in a case like this. Okay, and so this Brian Mitchell, who believed as a fundamentalist Mormon that he was only following the true teachings of Mormonism,
and at the expense of this young girl.
Exactly, at the expense of this young girl.
Of this innocent young girl.
I agree. Terrible.
Whose family are all Mormon.
Well, yeah.
And like I said before, they came out and said, they didn't call him a street preacher, they called him a religious man.
Yeah.
That right there was where my red flag went up.
Yeah.
When they referred to him as a religious man, it was, they know he's a Mormon. They just don't want to say so.
So, and since knowing that they were Mormons, and they didn't call, didn't call him a street preacher, or, then they were in the spin mode. They're trying to hide the fact that, hey, they knew he was a excommunicated Mormon.
Sure.
And the fact that,
I'm quite sure a bishop said, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, so, this whole thing is terrible, but it brings up, and what the news is, and these little pieces that are coming out in the next show that you'll see next week, is I'm going to bring out all these different points. There's 12 different parallels that have been coming out of the news that as soon as Helen and I heard it, went, boy, that's Mormon right there.
Yep.
Boy, that's a Mormon point. And so we're going to bring those all together for you and show those. Now, I got about 30 seconds left on this program. What I want to say to you folks in this last few seconds is, Helen and I come to Christian churches and we do seminars about the teachings of Mormonism, and we compare them between Mormonism and Christianity. So if we haven't been to your church, invite us to come. We'd be happy to come, because it's important that you understand the differences so that you never fall prey to this false religion. Lord bless. See you next week.